This hike was filmed in April 2020 at Leon Levy Preserve in Lewisboro for the kindergartners at Meadow Pond Elementary School. We want to thank the parent-teacher organization for sponsoring this hike as part of their commitment to enrichment for students at Meadow Pond during the school closure in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We hope you enjoy this virtual tour of Leon Levy. Please visit the links below to learn more about items discussed in this hike.
Good afternoon, it's Jim. We're going to do a virtual hike because we're all staying inside. We're wearing our masks so that we all stay healthy, and I hope you're all staying healthy. We were here last in the fall, and as I recall, the foliage wasn't quite turning yet. We had to work really hard to find a couple red maple leaves, I recall, and maybe some orange sugar maple leaves we saw, but we didn't see too much. And now it's a late spring. With climate change, spring has been coming about 3 weeks earlier, but this is an exception. And it was 28 degrees here this morning. We had hail yesterday twice on Earth Day, and it's just a really quiet spring. And maybe it's a coincidence. It seems as soon as the virus came, spring kind of stopped coming too. It's all kind of very quiet and kind of sad, I think. But spring will come, and we'll see what we can find today. Can I point out one thing? How about this? We have a beautiful native garden here that people have spent a lot of time planting, and nothing's up there yet, but this is called dead nettle, which is in the mint family, and it just sprung up here. And that's one of the nice surprising things about spring is you'll get flowers just nature provides. So people don't like dandelions in their yard, but I do, and the pollinators do. So we've got some nice dandelions here. And again, this is called dead nettle. And because it's got four sides, it's square, we know it's in the mint family. It doesn't smell like a mint, but it does have these pretty little pink flowers coming out. And again, that'll be for all the insects now that have no other flowers, no other source of pollen. These early flowers are very important for them. You know, we're trying to encourage native plants because they're better for wildlife, and this is a non-native invasive, but at least it's got some flower, and this is called garlic mustard. And I know you can't smell it from where you are, but it smells pretty good, kind of like garlic. And you can make pesto out of this. I've done it. It's really quite pungent. And we pull this up whenever we see it so that it doesn't spread, because it can really take over. That's garlic mustard. We were hoping we'd see this, and this is bloodroot. This is one of the first native flowers to come out. It's in a group called spring ephemerals. Ephemeral means short-lived, and these and a couple other wildflowers will have their whole lifespan in just a couple weeks. And they take advantage of the fact that the soil's warm enough, but the leaves are not out yet. So they'll quickly sprout their flowers and go to seed all before the other trees leaf out and shade them out. So they will not live in the shade in the summertime, but in the springtime like this, where they're on a normal sunny day, it would be all sun, they spring up and take advantage. And this is called bloodroot because it's got, we're of course not going to pull it up, but it has a red root, and it spreads nicely. You can grow it in your garden, and it's slow growing. It's actually pollinated by bees, but the seeds are transported by ants. And ants, of course, can't travel too far on their tiny little legs, So the bloodroot really does not spread more than a short distance every year. That's why I think it's so special. So that's bloodroot. So this is sensitive fern, and sensitive fern grows in wetlands, and we think of wetlands as down in a low valley, but wetlands can also be on the side of the hill. So this whole area, although it doesn't look wet, has to have very wet soil because sensitive fern only grows in wetlands. It's also called bead fern because we can't get too close because of social distancing, but all these little spores on it, it's a fern so it doesn't have seeds, it has spores, look like beads. It's also called sensitive fern because it's sensitive to the cold. So the first time it gets cold in, say, September, even before a frost, it'll die. One of the first ones to just kind of turn black and die. So here's wineberry. It's like blackberry or raspberry, and it's non-native. And the non-native plants, which are typically invasive, are invasive or taking over or aggressive because they green up so much earlier than anything else. So a rule of thumb now, here in April, if you see it and it's green, it probably doesn't belong here. So the barberry here is all green. The burning bush is greening up. The honeysuckle is green. And this non-native wineberry is green too. And the problem with these invasives is they green up so much earlier, they would shade out those spring ephemerals we saw back there, the bloodroot. And they have a longer growing season, so they can outcompete the natives. And we don't like to see that. The wineberry is called wineberry because this pretty, even though it's not native, it does have some good qualities. This pretty bark is wine colored, and on a cold day like today, when there's not much color in the woods, I think it's very pretty. Here's another spring plant that you'll only see in April. These are called ramps, and they're native, and they smell very oniony. They're in the onion family, but unlike the garlic mustard, which is really pungent, this has a really kind of gentle onion smell, and they can be eaten as they are, raw, in salads. We don't pick anything because it's a nature preserve, and ramps are not that plentiful, so we would never pick these and don't encourage anybody to pick them. But in certain parts of the country, they have ramp festivals. They're a real big deal in Appalachia. So it's ramp season. Here's some more bloodroot, and I pointed out because a couple years ago, with the grant from the Leon Levy Foundation, we were able to remove all the Norway maple trees that are non-native and are invasive. And the Norway maple trees are greening up already. So this whole area would have been shaded by now, and bloodroot wouldn't have been able to live here. So it's encouraging for us to see that now that we've removed the Norway maples, nature is coming back. So we have a whole bloodroot here. And the other thing we're doing is protecting the native trees that are coming up from the deer. So here's a tulip tree, and we put these cages around it, and that prevents the deer from eating it. And you can do that at home, where you have some native seedlings or saplings to protect them from deer. You don't have to deer fence your whole yard, which is very expensive and doesn't really work because deer fencing always breaks down. And in another month, all these little native saplings you see around here are going to leaf out, and I can't wait to come back and see how the forest is regenerating. I mentioned we protected the native trees back there from the deer with fencing, and I was just asked, why don't we protect this one? And we don't have to, because this is a beech sapling and it has its own protection. These very sharp buds, which will become leaves in another week or two, are pointy enough that the deer won't eat them. The other interesting thing here, at the end of April, this tree still has its leaves on it, which is just bizarre. Of course, all trees, deciduous trees, lose their leaves in the fall. So I'm just picking off these leaves. They're still not falling off. And I guess when these buds burst and the leaves come out, these will finally fall off. But these also make it very distasteful to the deer. Who wants to eat that? It's like a potato chip. It doesn't taste as good. So we don't have to fence the beech trees to protect them because it has its own built-in protections.
There's a bigger one. Go.
Here's another nice wildflower. This is called roundleaf Pyrola, and it's related to shinleaf, which we may also see. It's what I call semi-evergreen, because it keeps some of its leaves through the winter, but these are the new leaves shooting up, and it'll get a nice little flower soon. So we see here some violets, and along with the yellow dandelions, they're a common thing growing in your lawn, and people, they don't give them much credit. The lowly violet. It turns out violets, if you don't use lawn chemicals, will come up in your lawn and give you a beautiful purple and white flower. And like any early flower, it's really critical for bees and other insects that have no other source of nectar. And it's also, the violet is also the host plant for a butterfly called a fritillary butterfly that can only lay its eggs, and the larva can only feed on the leaves of the violet. So violets deserve more respect. Must be a shag-bark hickory, maybe? Here is a small flower called Canada mayflower, and it will form a blanket and have a little white flower, but this being April, it's not in flower yet because it's a mayflower. And then next to it, here's a sessile bellwort, I believe. This tiny little, it could be Solomon seal. I get them mixed up. It's hard to tell. But this is a nice little native plant, whether it's bellwort or Solomon seal. That's a nice one. And over here we've got some kind of sedge. Sedges stay green all winter long. And like anything in nature, there are hundreds of different types of sedges. The most common one is a woodland sedge, and since we're in the woods, I'm going to call this a woodland sedge. Here's another sedge. This is called Pennsylvania sedge, and it's already in flower. And it's just about ready to go to seed. So this has such a brief time to be in flower and make seeds. I mean, here it is, end of April, and the season's almost over for the Pennsylvania sedge. But if you look out, you can see all the Pennsylvania sedge. It can grow in shade like this. Before I knew what it was, I thought, boy, isn't that nice? Somebody grew grass right here and they keep cutting it every couple weeks. but that's because it's not a grass, it's a sedge, and this is as tall as it'll get. But it forms this really beautiful blanket of green in the understory. Now next to it here is a white wood sedge, a white wood aster, and these are very common. They're native. They don't, like any aster, it won't flower until the fall. So if you're lucky enough to have these, they do spring up in yards. You just have to be patient. You can't mow it. You have to let it grow, but you'll be rewarded by nurturing it all summer long. In the fall, when there aren't any other flowers, you'll get a beautiful white flower from this aster. But it's actually a Christmas fern. This is the new sprout of the Christmas fern, one of the first ones to come up. You know, that sensitive fern we saw before, it hasn't even come up yet. But I thought it was a lady fern until I looked down and was corrected, because I could see underneath the leaves, this is last year's Christmas fern. And the Christmas fern is evergreen. That means it keeps green all winter long. And it did again this year. Here's a jack in the pulpit, which grows in the wetland. So we're in a little wetland here. And it's just popping up through the leaves. And if you look there, you can even see there's Jack. And Jack's right there, nice and comfy in the pulpit. And I often confuse these with Trillium because they have 3 leaves. But Trillium, which also grows in the Levy Preserve, has a pretty red flower right now. We may not see any. Trillium is completely symmetrical, whereas Jack in the Pulpit has 2 leaves going this way and 1 up this way. So that's Jack in the Pulpit. Some more over there. Here we've got skunk cabbage, which also grows in the wetland. And a lot of people don't like the smell because it's very skunky. That's the name. It turns out bear do like skunk cabbage and will eat a lot of this. Skunk cabbage will only leaf out for a couple months, and if you're lucky enough to have a wetland in your yard, you'll have a lot of skunk cabbage. And people have called me alarmed at skunk cabbage taking over. This will completely disappear by the middle of summer. It also has a flower in here. I don't think we can see it. It's probably already bloomed, but there is a tiny flower in the skunk cabbage, and you know the story. The plant can create its own heat, so it'll push up even in the middle of February up through the snow, and it's probably the first plant we have here that has a flower. You'll never really see it. It's deep down inside, but there are flies and other insects that'll take advantage of that and get nectar from it and pollinate. Here we have trout lily, which also grows in moist areas like this. We don't see a flower right here, but it'll have a beautiful little yellow flower, and it's called trout lily. It's also called dogtooth violet. The names are confusing because it's neither a lily nor a violet, but whatever. And it's called trout lily because it's speckled, and it's supposed to either look like the scales of a trout. Maybe it's also called trout lily because it's out now just as fishing season's starting. We're so excited, we just found Trillium. And as I said, it's got 3 leaves, perfectly symmetrical. And we're going to torture it a little bit and make it show us the flower. It's got this beautiful red flower, which some people say doesn't smell very good. I'm not going to try that. But it's got we can even see I believe they're called the anthers inside the flower there. So excited we could find a Trillium on this cold day. Okay, back to bed. Sorry. Here's another fern called cinnamon fern, we think. And this, like the ostrich fern, has what's called a fiddlehead. And this is another delicacy in the country, like ramps. People will take this and fry it up and eat it. I guess the ostrich fern has a bigger fiddlehead, so that's probably a little more worthwhile to pick. And again, we're not picking anything. But if you think of a violin or a fiddle with the fiddlehead, the way it's kind of scrolled around, that's why it's called a fiddlehead. We saw a picture back at the mansion ruins of a picnic table that somebody, a beautiful picnic table somebody had built last year. And here's nature's picnic table. And we can see that the chipmunks, or maybe the squirrels, have cracked open some nuts and had a little feast, had a little party. And you can just imagine them all sitting around the picnic table here, having a delicious meal of acorns. We saw this last time we were hiking here, and this is, someone just said it looks like poop. No, it doesn't, it's not poop. This is a burl, and it's, or a gall, and it's a growth on the branch here that was started by an insect that drilled in here and laid some eggs. And in response to that kind of wound, the tree puts out all these cells, almost like a cancerous growth or a tumor, grows all around here, or like a scab, to protect itself from the wound. And of course, not knowing, it's also protecting the insect and the egg that overwinters in here from any other birds or predators. So it does not harm the tree, and a nice way of an insect making a little house to stay warm in the winter. So here's a pretty yellow flower at long last, a buttercup. You might see these come up in your lawn. And again, some people think in their lawn they're a weed, but they're native and I think very pretty. Another buttercup here. And I won't pick it because there's so few flowers, but you know you can take it and then put it under your chin, and if you see yellow, it means you like butter. Here's a pretty Trillium, two of them, that's flowering now. So you can see the beautiful flower. And a good example of how invasives crowd out wildflowers. You can see this Trillium is getting smothered by the garlic mustard. So we're going to do the Trillium a favor and get rid of that garlic mustard so that it can thrive. We found a remnant of last year's tulip, and this is from the tulip tree, and I think we saw this before. In another couple weeks, at the top of these tulip trees, they will have these beautiful yellow-orange flowers that sort of look like tulips all over the canopy. You can't see them because they're 80, 100 feet up in the air. Usually we only see them when a squirrel will eat the stem and knock it to the ground, or when we see some of this left over from last year. Here's one, the inside of the cross-section of the tulip flower. And if you look around, we're in this tulip forest. These tulip trees grow very fast and they self-prune. They drop their lower branches, so it looks like we're in a telephone pole forest. But it's all tulip trees with a couple beech trees underneath and a white oak and some hickories.
Poison ivy?
Oh, poison ivy. I won't touch this one, but it's just interesting, and I want you to be able to identify it so that you don't get an allergic reaction. The poison ivy leaves will be green all summer long. In the fall, they turn that beautiful red, but it's interesting, they're also red right now in the springtime. So you can see all these little sprouts, 6 inches high, with little red leaves just coming out. And again, the red leaves will turn green, but they look almost like Japanese maples or something. But it's poison ivy. Here's a nice flower called Colt's foot, and you'll only see it for just a day or two in the spring. I used to get it confused with dandelions, but dandelions wouldn't grow in a ditch like this. And it's called Colt's foot because the leaf looks just like a colt or a horse foot. We've just come across an interesting piece of fox poop, and you can see, if you look at it, it's just eaten, unfortunately, a rabbit. I think that's rabbit hair. So the fox will stand up and poop in a prominent place just to kind of mark the territory. And by looking at it, you can see what the fox had for dinner. And in this case, it looks like, unfortunately, it was a rabbit. You can always tell if it's a fox or coyote versus a dog, because all of you who have a dog know that your dog always likes to go to the bathroom off the trail. They'll kind of go off into the woods, kind of hide. They don't want predators to know they've been around. But big mammals like coyotes and fox, you know, they're not afraid of anything. They'll always leave their poop right in the middle of the trail, just to kind of like a business card saying, "I was here, stay out of my way." There's a bumblebee. Okay. Nice, huh? Almost looks like braided hair. Birds. Sparrow. And it sings a song that sounds like Old Sam, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. And they're going to go on in a few more weeks. They spend the winter here and nest up in Canada. Thanks for coming along with us today. Sorry we couldn't be together. I hope to see you later on in the spring. And be sure to wear your mask and stay safe.